Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you joining us today. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, we have our attendees slowly coming in. Please be patient. This is a process as we welcome everybody into the webinar. Okay, here we are. Thank you so much for joining us today for DCAA's training. My name is Beth Freeman Myers. I'm up here in beautiful North Idaho, and I am joined today by my colleague Yuta Bangs in Eastern Tennessee, and we are members of the NAPEX National Training Team. NAPEX stands for National Apex Accelerator Alliance. We would like to welcome you on behalf of NAPEX and your local Apex Accelerator. Your local Apex Accelerator is a proud member of NAPEX, and we're glad that they are co-hosting today's DCAA webinar. The Apex Accelerator Network consists of nearly 700 government contract experts in over 300 offices throughout the United States, including Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Guam. Under management of the Department of Defense's Office of Small Business Programs, Apex Accelerators provide education and training to help companies prepare and position themselves for government contracting opportunities. If your company is interested in government contracting and you have not yet engaged with your local Apex Accelerator, we encourage you to do so. We will drop the link for that access into the chat during today's presentation. You can learn more about our Apex Accelerators at the website listed here. While each Apex Accelerator program may be set up and operate a little differently, in general, the Apex Accelerators provide training and assistance with registrations and certifications. We also provide market research assistance and bid match services in many cases. And we can help companies learn to navigate and position themselves for government contracting opportunities and success. An important role that Apex Accelerators play is connecting America's businesses to resources and opportunities. Today's webinar is an example of connecting businesses to resources. Many Apex Accelerators also host events to connect businesses with government contracting professionals and prime contractors. We have a few things to remind you about today, housekeeping items for today's event. First, your lines will be muted during today's presentation. Please remember to post your questions in the Q&A. Avoid the chat, but put them in the Q&A section, and we will try to have our presenters answer as many as possible. We'll also be answering your questions in the Q&A, so keep an eye on that as we go. Slides for this training will be sent out to attendees within the next few days. Today, we are joined by Ms. Caitlin Riggle and Mr. David Kern. Caitlin is the Operations Audit Liaison Small Business Coordinator for the Defense Contract Audit Agency, also known as DCAA. Caitlin has been with DCAA since 2009 and currently acts as the agency's Small Business Liaison, offering education, guidance, and support to small and medium businesses working in the federal contracting realm. She graduated from King's College with a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting, as well as Strayer University with a Master of Business Administration, concentrating in government acquisition. David Kern is a small business professional at Tobyhanna Army Depot and has served in this position for 12 years. In addition to serving as a starting point for any business, large or small, to doing business with Tobyhanna Army Depot, David also assists firms with resolving payment issues and using wide area workflow to submit payment requests. Ms. Riggle will be sharing insights into barriers to payment from DCAA perspective during today's presentation. And then David will be sharing information about wide area workflow. We will also be providing some information and resources about provisional billing rates in the chat during today's presentation. We will be taking a 5-minute break between presentations. So now please join me in a warm welcome to our friends at the DCAA and the ACC Office of Small Business Programs, who are ready to share their knowledge with us. I'd like to turn the time over to Caitlin and David. Thank you.
Hey, Beth, can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay, I like to always confirm that. So, hey, this is Caitlin Regal, small business liaison here for DCAA. So happy to be here. Always a pleasure to work with all of you with our friends at Apex Accelerator. So, with that being said, I'm going to kick off today talking about barriers to payment from DCAA's perspective, and then David is going to come on and he's going to speak about the ins and outs of WAF and roadblocks that you may experience there and how to overcome them. So, with that being said, let me share my screen. All right, can y'all see? Are we good here? Can I get a yay? Nay?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right. So cool. All right. So let's talk about barriers to payment from a DCAA perspective. A few items we're going to go over today. We're going to be talking about the types of contracts that are eligible for reimbursement. So long story short there, it's all cost reimbursable type of contracts. We're going to talk about authority and responsibility. We're going to understand from a payment perspective who's in charge of what when it comes to the contracting officer, the contract administrator, and responsibilities that you guys have as a prime contractor. Regulatory oversight. So with that being said, we're going to talk about when FAR, DFARS, and CAS may come into play. If you are new to government contracting and you're kind of just dipping your feet here in the water, FAR stands for the Federal Acquisition Regulation. DFARS stands for the Defense Supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and CAS stands for Cost Accounting Standards. I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about CAS right now, especially if you are a certified small business, because that is where you are exempt from that layer of regulation. Last but not least, we are going to talk about DCAA prepayment assessments. So that is our little checklist that we use when reviewing vouchers, and I'm going to describe some common pitfalls that you may see or reasons why we would return a voucher. I'm going to have you correct it or maybe add a little bit more detail. So when it comes to types of contracts for interim reimbursement, we are talking about cost reimbursable contracts such as cost plus fixed fee, cost plus incentive fee, and then, we're talking about estimate of total cost for obligating funds. It establishes a cost ceiling. These are costs that you're actually incurring and billing on a monthly basis via the SF 1034. SF stands for standard form. You may have a fixed fee or a target fee depending on what is negotiated with your contract. So keep that in mind. That's, a percentage of what you're going to bill each month. There is a common misconception. T&M is actually a cost reimbursable type of contract. So you would submit a 1034 every month to get reimbursed for the cost incurred on that. And then if you have a fixed price progress payment type of contract award, you can actually submit for reimbursement. I believe it's monthly. I haven't had too much experience with that, but that is submitted for reimbursement on the SF 1443. So we can talk more about that in a little bit. When it comes to authority and responsibility, we are talking about what DCAA is responsible here on this slide. We're talking about we will receive reimbursement vouchers, interim rate adjustment vouchers, final rate adjustment vouchers directly from contractors via the PI and the WAF portal that David is going to talk about in a little bit. And we're going to recommend whether we approve or reject those vouchers. There's a few reasons that we would reject the voucher for, and we're going to get into those on the next few slides. And then if we have any sort of concern, whether there is, unallowable costs, or if we suspect fraud. I know we don't like to say the F word, but it is out there. So if that's the case, we do issue a Form 1, which gets submitted to the DODIG for review. let's talk about your responsibilities as a prime contractor. Prime contractor is responsible for preparing and submitting claims for the reimbursement according to the terms of the contract and ensures that billing is accurately reflected. So a few things that I want to talk about when we're talking about putting our invoices or vouchers together. I use invoice and voucher interchangeably, so if you get confused, just know I'm talking about the same thing. When you're putting your invoices together, you should be checking the terms of your contract. Are there ceilings, right? When it comes to indirect rates? Are there special, is overtime allowed? Are you billing for overtime? You all should have contract briefs. You should brief your contracts and have, that 100-page contract document, right? Summarized in maybe 5 to 10 pages, sometimes even less, of key clauses that you must abide by. Is travel allowable? All of those nuances within the contract that you need to be cognizant of in your contract briefs. That way you can easily refer back to your contract brief when you're preparing your monthly invoices. You should be using reports directly from your cost accounting system. So whether it is the general ledger, the job cost ledger, the labor distribution report, those are just some examples of reports you can run within your system to create your vouchers. Vouchers on a cost type contract should have current and cumulative costs, right? So for the current period that you're billing for, let's say, the month of February, since that's what just passed, and then the cumulative since the inception of the contract. Why is this? That's really easy to, compare what the ceiling is for the cost, the fixed fee, and the total to make sure that you're still under that ceiling or within that ceiling. Or even if you're within 70 to 80% of that ceiling, and there is that requirement to reach out to the contracting officer when you get to that certain point of cost incurred that, hey, we're either winding down or I need more funding, or you raise the ceiling. You got to have that conversation, right? So that is another tool that you can use to monitor your cost incurred through monthly billing procedures. So, and then also keep in mind, whatever you're billing that you're using your cost accounting system reports for, that you have support for that should you be asked, should it be selected for an audit. We're not going to necessarily ask for timesheets when we're reviewing a voucher, but just keep that in mind for the potential for audit, that you have that supporting documentation for what you are billing the government for, essentially, right? Let's talk about accounting system requirements. So this is a hot topic when we're talking about cost type contract awards. I know I keep saying that, but I want to drill this home, is that, when you have a fixed price contract, you're billing completely differently. So everything today really pertains to that cost type contract award. And the accounting system requirements will have you, again, I got ahead of myself here with the current and cumulative billing amounts. And that the limitation of funds and the limitation of cost clauses. You will see that in every cost type contract award. You will see the limitation of cost clause for FAR, which is FAR 52 23220, and the limitation of funds clause, FAR 52 23222. A lot of numbers, a lot of acronyms. Sorry about that. And then the allowable cost and payment clause. These are all signs that it is a cost reimbursable award. Limitation of cost and funds, exactly what I just said before about when you reach that 70 to 80% mark, that you need to have that conversation with your contracting officer on what to do next, right? Just notifying them that you're headed towards that percentage of completion. And then you can find invoicing and payment requirements, all of the detail listed. We're talking some high level summary here today, but that, if anything, in a cost type contract award, the FAR clause for 52 to 16.7 is one of the most essential clauses that you need to abide by. So keep that in mind as well. All right, let's talk about regulatory oversight and defining payments. So These are some key other key FAR clauses where you want to pay attention if they're in the contract, or what will apply to you. When it comes to the Prompt Payment Act for the U.S. Code 31 and then the 3903, payment due to contractor within 30 days after a proper invoice. Why do I have proper in big red font? Because that's where DCAA comes in, and if we reject a voucher, it kind of restarts the time, the ticking time clock. I don't know what that saying is, but you know what I mean. It restarts the clock of submitting a revised invoice and DCAA determining, yes, we accept this, we approve it for payment. Contract terms and conditions, again, all with the red font with the proper invoice. The fixed price for construction contracts, I believe Dave can speak more on this one when it comes to fixed price construction contracts. I'm not too familiar with that one. And then progress payments, like we talked about before. Fixed price with progress payments is also considered a type of cost reimbursable contract. So if you have a fixed price contract, check to see if FAR 52-232-16 is included in the terms of the contract. If that's the case, you can submit vouchers and request payment as work progresses no more than monthly to include 80% of the total cost plus subcontract financing. So let's talk about, grabbing the wrong mouse here, regulatory oversight when it comes to voucher requirements. There's that FAR 52-216-7 again. Hopefully you guys can catch on that. Again, this is a really important clause to make sure you are in compliance with. So it is allowing you to bill monthly. However, if you are a small business, you can bill every 2 weeks. We kind of give grace to that because as a small business, your cash and your funding is pretty limited. So we want to make sure that you're covering your expenses as you incur them. Again, in accordance with the terms of the contract per FAR 31-2, reimbursement for costs paid. Again, you have to actually incur these costs. You can't submit anything that is an expected expense or anything in the future. You have to already have these incurred and logged in your system. And for small business, we talked about the small business every 2 weeks. If you have FAR 52-216-8 within the terms of your contract, this is regarding how you can bill your fixed fee. And this used to be a touchy subject when I was actually reviewing vouchers on a regular basis. So how you need to reserve your fixed fee when you're billing, right? So contracting officer to reserve not to exceed 15% of the total fixed fee or $100,000, whichever is less. Have that conversation with your contracting officer to see how they want you to bill your fixed fee. Do they want you to reserve 15% of your fixed fee for every invoice, or do they want you to reserve your entire fixed fee until you have $100,000 reserved in fixed fee and then start billing it? It's a little convoluted, but it is something that you need to have that conversation with just to gain clarity. DCAA can't tell you what to do here because we defer to the contracting officer on that one. They have the most authority and they have the final say. So, we respect that and it's all up to them basically. Lastly, review the costs that are within your vouchers. Make sure they are allowable. Make sure they're allocable to the contract that you're billing, and make sure at some point that you've determined they are reasonable. I wouldn't necessarily, incur, let's say you need supplies for your office real quick and you paid, I don't even know the going price of a desk, but let's just say $10,000 for a desk. I feel like that's pretty hefty, right? So let's say you paid $10,000 for a desk and that now you're charging it direct to a contract. Chances are you probably could have gotten a desk a little bit cheaper, if not significantly cheaper somewhere else. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about reasonable cost. You need to establish why you think what you've incurred and what you're billing is reasonable. So those are three things that we look for when DCAA performs an audit. We look to see if costs claimed or proposed are allowable, allocable, reasonable within the terms of the contract per FAR 31.2. Let's talk about accelerated payment, and you can find the prompt payment guidance per the DFARS 232.903. Payment is due within 15 days after receipt of an acceptable invoice with all the required documentation. So the government has 15 days to pay you once we approve your voucher. If you are not receiving payment within 15 days, you need to contact your contracting officer, see what's going on, and see when you are getting that money. So DCAA has what we call a prepayment assessment. And the purpose is it's an approval of interim public vouchers, and we determine if the voucher was prepared in accordance with contract terms, provisions, and we'll pursue any adjustments that are needed if it's over or under billed, if we consider it to be over or under billed. So again, what do? We basically make sure the math is mathing on your invoice, right? We check to make sure, the total direct labor, the total materials, subs, whatever you are including on a cost element level ties back to your accounting system reports that you're sending through. And so we'll look for that. We'll look to make sure the appropriate provisional billing rates are applied, right? That you're using the ones that are most current and approved by DCAA. We'll make sure that not only are the correct rates applied, that they are applied correctly, right? And that the math calculation there is correct. We will assess if the fee calculated is calculated correctly and if the proper withholding is there. We'll look for the detail that you provide from the accounting system report. If it makes sense, if it is jiving with the terms of the contract. It is a quick review. It takes a little, like an hour or two, to kind of just bounce things back and forth between what you've invoiced, what is the supporting detail, and then tying it back to hopefully the contract brief. It's always helpful to have a contract brief, or to send DCAA a contract brief when you are submitting your vouchers. That kind of streamlines the whole process to where DCAA doesn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. So, just
And I
have
have a
that into
question.
consideration too. Sure, go ahead.
Yes, it's a terminology. What is a
Mhm.
fixed fee? Is it the same as a fixed cost?
Mm-mm. No, when you're talking about a fixed fee, it's cost, right? So your direct elements, your labor, your the subcontracts, direct material, ODCs, right? So those are your costs. Cost plus fixed fee would be your profit or your fee of profit fee that's interchangeable. So if you've negotiated a cost type contract, let's say it's cost plus fixed fee, you're talking about the cost that you're incurring plus the applied fee, whether that's always negotiated between you and your contracting officer. For example, if it's 4 or 5%, that would be an example of the fixed fee. Does that make sense?
Yes, for the person who asked, if you need further clarification, just put it in the Q&A. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Preparation of vouchers. So let's talk about how you can put together your vouchers adequately or properly, whatever term you want to use for that one. So vouchers should not be submitted more than once every 2 weeks, unless you have some special arrangement with your contracting officer. Again, they have the final authority for everything. DCAA is just following the general and the high level rules established in FAR and DFARS. Public voucher claims for reimbursement must be prepared on the prescribed government forms. So that is the SF, the 1034, the 1035, or the 1443. First, DCAA typically reviews all first vouchers, and then we have a sample selection of interim vouchers, depending on risk and parameters set by each DCAA office. I can't tell you what they are because it's different for every office as far as voucher selections go. And then the final voucher cannot be submitted until one, that the contract work is actually complete and that you finalized your rates for that final year, right? And that's how you would close the final voucher out. But the rates have to be finalized first, so you know what your actual final costs are, and then get those adjusted and or true up at the end there. So let's talk about electronic, say that 10 times fast, Katie, electronic submission of interim vouchers. So all vouchers should be submitted through WAF, which is the wide area workflow, unless contract terms require hard copy vouchers to be submitted. That an example of that would be something that is secret, top secret, classified, and you will get special instructions on how to bill. But for everything else, you really are recommended and required to use, I should say, required to use WAF. In WAF, the cost of voucher is equivalent to the 1034 or the 1035 and must be included in the separate electronic file attached in WAF. So you'll have options, and David, again, will get into this in WAF as far as attachments and what should be included there. Again, in accordance with the contract terms, any special billing agreements, let's say you have a rate ceiling and you can only bill up to 10% of your G&A rate or up to 30% of your overhead rate. I'm throwing numbers out there, guys. Every contractor is different, so don't freak out when you hear, what? 10% G&A? That's crazy. So if you have those ceilings established within the terms of your contract, go back to your vouchers, make sure that's what they state, right? Or adjust it if it's not. So really important to abide by the terms of the contract and any special billing or payment instructions that were given to you. And then we have there's a link there for the guidance and training on completing a voucher invoice per the WAF, per PI, which is the Procurement Integrated Enterprise. I don't know, David, I always forget the acronym for that. Do you know what the acronym stands for PI?
Yes, that's Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment.
Environment. I would have lost Jeopardy, I guess. Electronic, did I go over this? Okay, so this is additional information for.
I have a follow-up question on the fixed fee, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Can you bill for fixed fee before the project is finished?
Yes, so you would, again, checking with your contracting officer to see how they want you to bill fixed fee. You're either going to bill the fixed fee, let's say it's 5% applied to the cost for that period, right? So you would apply 5% and that would be your fixed fee for that period, less 15% of that, because you have to withhold, right? And then that's a safeguard for the government. Should you have any question cost, any issues with allowability, it's kind of like just withholding that for the government. Or you could withhold your fixed fee up to $100,000, and then you could start billing. So again, it's all on how the contracting officer prefers you to bill that.
Thank you. That's all we had.
Yeah, cool. All right, so where are we? Okay, so yeah, I have instructions here on the SF 1035 and how to put it together. So that is there at your disposal as a resource. Electronic submission of final vouchers. So that is the last voucher that will be submitted on the contract. It is a separate completion voucher, which will be submitted for each individual project or task order. And again, that has to be in accordance with that allowable cost and payment clause. So check out the details on the final voucher submission, and that's under the subparagraph D5 of that clause. Because I am a visual learner, this is the SF 1035. And you can see here, it's just an example. This is a fictitious company, and it's ABC Corporation on 100 Main Street in New York City. So here you could see a breakdown on the, I'm going to start at the top. So look at the top right. You could see the estimated cost, or what was agreed to as far as the ceiling goes. So for this contract, it's $250,000 of direct cost. So your total cost of direct and applied indirect. Then you have the agreed to fixed fee of $15,000, with the total being, so you have your cost, your fixed fee, and then the total cost of $265,000. And it looks like they withheld they billed 85% of the fixed fee of that $12,750. So then now let's bring it down a little bit, and we're looking at the major cost elements here on the middle left. You could see a breakdown of current and cumulative costs of the direct materials, the subs, interplant charges, special tooling, direct labor. You have your applied indirects here, you have your overhead, your G&A, you have the sum of all of that, and then you have the fixed fee, total cost times 6%. So hopefully that illustrates what I was describing before as far as what the fixed fee is. And then you have the total amounts claimed, right? So you can see current and cumulative. I just looking here, I see DCAA Form 1, which means suspected fraud. So it looks like they backed a few things out based on DCAA Form 1s. That's a whole other can of worms. I don't really want to get into that today. I want to give David enough time to talk about the ins and outs of WAF, because that's why we're here today. But with that being said, what DCAA is going to do when we have the 1035 like this, we're going to look at the current and cumulative amounts. We're going to bounce it back to either your general ledger or your job cost ledger, and whatever supporting detail you have for these costs. We're going to make sure the math, right? The sum of the direct cost is correct. The applied indirect overhead and G&A rates are correct. The total cost multiplied by the 6%, we're going to make sure that's correct. And that the sum of everything matches. So that's a little example of what DCAA does when we review vouchers. Now let's talk about reasons on why we would reject an invoice. And again, David's going to talk about the pitfalls when it comes to inputting data into WAF. But things that we see here at DCAA, we're going to make sure your cage code is correct, that you're sending it to the right DODAP. Contract numbers and voucher numbers marry to each other, and that has the encompassed information that it needs. What I said before, invoicing current and cumulative amounts match and reconcile back to the books and records, either your general ledger, your job cost ledger, whatever you're using to support what you are invoicing. That invoice cost, it could include potential unallowable costs with either within the terms of the contract, or I should say, against the terms of the contract, right? If overhead is not allowed and overtime is not allowed, but you've billed overtime, that would be an example of a reason for rejection. Potential unallowable cost per the FAR 31205 series. You are not billing within the correct CLIN that you're supposed to be billing. Again, we look up the latest contract and modification to that contract to see the detail there. Billing over contract ceiling amounts. Again, if you have a certain funded amount and you went over funding, we will reject it. Let's say it's a 5-month period of performance that ended in January and you have cost incurred in February. Well, you're outside the period of performance. We'll have to reject the voucher. Fixed fee, I told you that before. Again, check with your contracting officer, make sure that's up to par. And then, just reconciliation and math issues, basically. Now, before David gets started, because I am winding down here with my presentation, I want to talk about resources from DCAA's website. So that QR code will take you to our public website, and the plethora of information there is not lacking. So we have our audit process overview, information for contractors manual. It is a 105-page PDF document, recently updated. It has everything from the SF 1408 for accounting systems. There's voucher and invoicing in there. If you hit Control F, you can find 1035, 1034, interim billing, a whole bunch of topics. And it's a really great starting point when you are researching as far as compliance goes. Directory of our audit programs. We didn't really talk about audits today. When we review vouchers, that's not considered an audit. That's just considered a review. But any sort of audit that you anticipate DCAA performing at your facility, you can check that out there. Checklist and tools. And yeah, so that's all available at your disposal on our website. This is our small business outreach survey. Please let us know the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to these presentations. If you don't like what we did today, if you don't like my style, please let me know, because I can't fix it if I don't know what's broke. But if you loved it, let me know also. Love hearing what works for you and what doesn't. So I'll give you guys a second to take a screenshot or hit that QR code there.
And I do have a couple questions.
All right. Well, okay, so I'm going to go to the next screen, which is my contact information. Let's leave that up.
Right.
Let's answer some questions.
Perfect. Can you walk through what the 6% was for?
Yes, I can. Let me back up. Ooh, back up. What's going on there? All right. I just expanded this. Can you see me expanding it, or is that just on my
Yes,
screen?
yes, we can see it.
Ooh, okay. I learned something. I'm not
It looks like it was the
savvy.
fixed fee earned.
Yep. So you could see, what is that?
6%?
M. If you go
Yes.
to the far left, you could see the letter M. So fixed fee earned, you could see the multiplication there. Total cost multiplied by 6%. That 6% was a negotiated fixed fee. So when you went under contract, right, you go into negotiations, and maybe I'm throwing scenarios out there, guys, so this is not Bible. Let's say you proposed a 10% fixed fee when you put your proposal together and sent this over to the contracting officer. And they're like, hey, 10% is a little too high. Do you think you could do a 5% fixed fee? And you're like, nah, I'm in business to make money. How about 6%? And they say perfect, and you guys go under contract, right? So that's where that 6% comes from. Is that's the negotiated fee for or profit, right? We use that interchangeably, fee and profit. And you can see the total cost, right? And when we're talking about total cost for the contract, thus far, we're talking about the major cost elements at the top there, where the materials, the subs, all of the direct cost elements, plus the applied indirects of overhead and G&A. So the total, the total cost would be $4,785. And then you would multiply that by 6% and get that $287. So total cost claimed for this voucher for that current period, that month there, is that $5,072.
Great. And then I
Okay,
have another
that-
question, which maybe, yes. So let us know if that didn't answer your question. I have another question that may be for you or maybe for Dave. We might loop him in early. So,
Yay!
scenario.
All right.
We had a contract that had installment payments approved, not progress payments. Do you know which WAF submission this would fall under? The KO suggested progress payment submission, but that was rejected.
Yeah, I don't normally
David.
get I don't normally get into installment payments. I'd have to ask my contracting officer here. So if you want to record that question and
Okay,
send that to us, we'll work on that. We'll get you an answer.
perfect, will do.
I want to err on the side of caution and say that's more of a fixed price type of award and not necessarily a cost type contract award. As far as what you're identifying in WAF, but again, I'm gonna refer to Dave on that one.
Perfect. I do not see any other questions at this point. Oh, here's one more. See, as I spoke, how or where can I access more info on these types of contracts? I'm familiar with contracting overall, but not as familiar with fixed fee contracts, WAF and PI, and I would like to become more familiar with the fundamentals.
Well, there,
I'm sorry,
Katie,
Dave,
I'll
go
let
ahead.
Katie, I'll let you go first on the for the cost reimbursement.
As far as through WAF, is that what the question was?
Yes, so the question was, go back here. Somebody would like to become more familiar with the types of contracts, not as familiar with fixed fee. So the question was about fixed fee contracts, WAF and PI, to learn more about those three.
The three topics.
Yes.
As far as contract awards, I can. So if that person wants to email me, I do have some other material that can kind of break down the
Okay.
different types of contract awards. WAF and PI definitely are their own animal. And again, on slides 12 and 13, you'll see instructions, and there's a lot of tutorials on PI. Once you get registered and get within the system, they have a lot of tutorials on how-tos.
And as far as using wide area workflow, I think you're going to see some screenshots during my presentation. It's going to be a little bit different this time around because the topic is barriers to payment. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. But I do training on registering in PIEE as well as using the wide area workflow module to create and submit payment requests. So that may answer that portion of the question.
Perfect. All righty. And just to remind everybody again, you will be receiving all the slides in a few days if you attended today. So do not see any other questions.
Awesome. Well, that is all I have. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I believe if I'm not sure who is going to share some slides or resources
Yeah,
regarding.
it's Beth here. I'll jump
all
in
right.
when you're.
Awesome.
Let's
I'm
see if
gonna.
this is gonna transition. Great job, Caitlin. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
folks, before we take this 5-minute break, we wanted to let you know about an awesome opportunity in the Boston area. You might be interested in DCAA's upcoming Small Business Roadshow on April 3rd, co-hosted by Hanscom Air Force Base Small Business Office and UMass Lowell Applied Research Corporation. DCAA has a follow-up Small Business Roadshow scheduled for April 24th in Landing, New Jersey, that is co-hosted by Army Contracting Command and that Apex Accelerator. So what a fun event. I'm going to leave this up for you for a moment, but right now let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Let's return at 50 past the hour or 10 till the hour. The same thing, depending on where you are. We'll see you back in 5.
Caitlin, do you want to try to bring up my presentation? I could see yours. I can see a presentation on the screen. You want to try and bring mine up?
So I'm not sure with the.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That
because
is
there's
Beth
another screen sharing
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. When she gets back and takes that down, I'll pull
Okay.
pull up
Okay.
the other one.
I can stop share now. Let's go ahead and do a test check, okay?
Let's do a quick test real fast.
Sure. There you go.
Test. Cool.
Because I
Thanks,
did see
guys.
Caitlyn's, and I'm hoping she can bring it up because there's definitely some overlap between her presentation and mine that I'm hoping. Ah, beautiful. Yes, I can see it. Excellent.
Yay.
Yay.
All right. So you want me to take this down, Beth,
Yep.
and you could put the 5
No.
minutes back up?
You're good to just leave that there.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. I hope the flow and everything was okay. Sometimes I talk a little too fast. Try to slow it down.
No, we think your conversational style is very engaging, Caitlin.
Absolutely.
okay.
And we had
Thank
one
you.
more question that came in after. So Dave, before we start with you, let me bring up that question when we restart. Caitlin, you might want to look at it already in the meantime. It's in the
Sure.
Q&A.
Let me pull that up. Well, that's very specific.
Chuck, were you going to still drop some information into the chat?
I sure can. Thank you, Beth.
Sure.
Yeah, so and we could talk about this because I'm not sure if that person walked away during the break here, but I really have no insight
Yeah, I
as
just
to
wanted you
what's
to have
going
a
on.
chance to look at it before.
Yeah, I know. I listen, we all have burning questions on that. I feel like it's just a blur as far as at least us understanding, how everything is affected. I think they're still trying to figure it out. So respectfully, I would just not I won't be able to answer that.
Right. I can just answer it. I can just type it in.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey, our 5 minutes is just about up. We'll give it another 30 seconds. Okay, welcome back. I'm Beth Freeman Myers. My colleague Yuta Bangs and I are hosting today's webinar for DCAA. Before we move on to our second topic, I encourage you to go to the chat. Our colleague through NAPEX, Chuck Beck, is dropping some very helpful links that you're going to want to grab pertaining to today's topics and moving forward. So take a minute to go to the chat. A reminder that your questions should be put in the Q&A section, and Yuta will work those in as appropriate for today's topics. And if we need to get back to you at a later time based on a more extensive answer or one that is unique to you and your situation, that's going to happen as well. So without further ado, we will continue with wide area workflow. David, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Kern. I'm the small business professional up at Tobyhanna Army Depot in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I always like to start with a sound check, so hopefully I'm projecting well.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Great. Thank you. So normally what I do, this is kind of a deviation for me. Maybe you've heard my presentations before on wide area workflow. I go over registering, creating a profile in PIEE, creating and submitting documents, and then resolving payment requests, which is kind of what we're doing here today. So kind of what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to kind of be winging it a little bit because I want to talk, because the topic is barriers to payment. What I want to do is highlight some areas as contractors go creating payment requests where some common mistakes are made. And sometimes these mistakes can result in a barrier to payment. Sometimes there's something the government fails to do when reviewing your payment request that can also lead to a barrier. So I want to pass along some of my experiences, which I hope will help you along as you get involved in contracting with the Department of Defense. So my presentation, I am going to be talking a little bit about creating those payment requests and some of the mistakes that I commonly see made. And then as we get through, we're going to talk a little bit about some tools that you can use that you can avail yourself to track your payment. And if there are any, if there is an issue, how you can resolve it. So without any further ado, if we can go to the next slide. Wide area workflow is the Department of Defense's preferred method of invoicing and payment. We don't pay by check and we don't accept payment invoices. So the way to get paid is to actually either go through this, go through the portal there, or sometimes we pay on a credit card. But if we're using wide area workflow as the payment method, there are 2 Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation clauses that we will insert in your contract. The first is referenced. It's the electronic submission of payment requests and receiving reports. And then the second one is the most important one. Again, if this is a template, it's called the Wide Area Workflow Payments Instructions Clause. So we will insert that in your contract in full text. And being that it's a template, it's going to be filled in by the contract office with information that will help you try to hopefully successfully submit that payment request. Next slide. So to go into a little bit more detail about the payment clause, it provides detailed instruction about the type of document you're going to create and submit, depending on the type of contract you have. It's also going to identify who at the government agency, whether that's, we call it an acceptor, or your contracting officer's representative, that could be your COR. Okay, that person is going to be identified in the clause. That person's responsible for reviewing your payment request and processing it for payment. So sometimes if there's a break in communication between the contractor and the government, that break in communication can cause a payment delay. So we want to make sure that this clause appears in your contract in full text and is also filled out properly. I know sometimes a mistake is on the government side, we fail to provide clear instructions or detailed instructions to the contractors through the contract. So sometimes that can be an issue as well. Next slide. Katie talked about cost reimbursement contracts. In my world here at Tobyhanna, I'm part of the Army Contracting Command. And so the contracts that we issue here serves the mission of Tobyhanna Army Depot, which is communication and electronics repair. But we're also like a small city. We have our own fire department. We have our own Department of Public Works. So my realm is fixed price contracts. We have contracts for supplies, services, and constructions. So depending on the type of contract you have, that's going to dictate the type of payment request you're going to submit in WAF. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, making some assumptions that you know how to use wide area workflow. When you log into PIEE, again, that's Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, you're going to see the wide area workflow, the WAF icon there under the payment box. So we're going to start it by clicking on it. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll go up under vendor in the top left corner. We'll click on that. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the options available to us. When we're creating payment requests, that's going to be the first choice we have there. I have arrows because I kind of borrowed this from my presentations, showing you showing you the process. So when we create our payment request, we're going to click create document. Next slide. Okay. And I'm not going to go step by step through the process. Maybe some of you have heard my presentation before. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. So some of these screens will look familiar. But what I really want to do is highlight some of the areas on some of these screens where mistakes are made that could cause a payment delay or a barrier to payment. When we click Create Document, this is the screen we're going to land on. I want to call your attention to the upper left-hand corner of the screen where the cage code is. That is your company's commercial and government entity code. You get that by registering in SAM. If you have an active registration in SAM, when you go to create your document, that field will be populated with your cage code. If it is blank, like we have in the example here, that means your SAM profile has expired, and you want to contact Chuck or Yuta at the Apex Accelerators to get your SAM profile reactivated. Because if you are expired in SAM, the system will not allow you to advance past this screen. Also, our payment office, Defense Finance Accounting Service, will not wire payments to an account that is expired in SAM. Okay, so just a tip there. Want to make sure your cage code appears there. Okay? The only required piece of information on this screen is your contract number. Now I have the contract number type kind of drop down there. Yes, Yuta?
Question.
Yes.
Can
yes.
you create a PI account without having a contract with that agency?
Sure, you can. There's no cost to registering with PI. Sometimes I've been contacted by companies that just want to create an account in PIEE and wide area workflow access. You don't need a contract. However, you want to log into PIEE at least once a month, because if you let your account linger longer than 30 days, it'll go inactive. So you want to make sure you keep it active. But yeah, you can if you want. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Right next to the contract number type to the right is the contract number. It's marked with an asterisk. Okay. I tell a lot of time companies, as we go through the presentation, we only want to provide the mandatory information. I'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a bit. So you're going to put in your contract number in the contract number field. Make sure that you type in your contract number correctly. I have had situations where the contractor misspelled the contract number. For example, the last 4 digits of the contract were 0468, and they typed in 0486. It was a valid contract, but not for that contract, for that contractor, I should say. And the payment wound up being wired to the wrong contractor, so that created a bit of a mess. So please be alert when you're typing in your contract number. If you omit a character, we're looking for a 13-digit contract number. So if it's not the required number of digits, it will be flagged by the system. But if you mingle some numbers or mangle some numbers, you could create a create a payment barrier. So you want to make sure the contract number is correct. To navigate through wide area workflow in the bottom left-hand corner, we have our navigation buttons. So we'll click next. We'll go to the next slide. Okay. And these are the line items from your contract. So depending on the type of contract you have, there can be many line items. In the example I have, I like to give service contracts. I think the key takeaway here is you want to make sure that you are submitting charges against the correct line in your contract. So it's very important, whoever is doing the billing in your company, whoever touches the contract, make sure they have a copy of the contract and all applicable modifications so that you're operating off the most current sheet of music, because sometimes this information does not carry over from your contract. You may not see any contract line items here. That does not mean that you cannot submit a bill in wide area workflow. You can add them, and I'll show you how to do that later. But for instance, on a service contract, you want to make sure you're submitting charges against the current period of performance. You may have lines that represent every year in your contract, but you want to make sure that those charges go against the current period of performance, because those are funded either with your base contract, or if an option year is exercised, it's going to be exercised via modification. So you want to make sure that the charges go against the correct period of performance, because if there's no money on that particular line, that will cause an invoice to be suspended or rejected for lack of funds. Okay, next slide. Want to make sure here we're being prompted to create the document. Selecting a document to create. That information is provided in the wide area workflow payments instructions clause. So whatever, if it's a service contract, as in my example here, it's going to be an invoice 2-in-1 for services only. If it's a construction contract, it'll be a construction payment invoice, which is right below that. And then a little further down, if it's a supply contract, normally we would be submitting an invoice and receiving report combo. So we want to make sure we choose the correct document. I have seen invoices rejected because the contractor chose the wrong document. Okay, next slide, please. This information also comes from the routing table, which is in the wide area workflow clause. A lot of times this information is auto-populated for you. So normally we don't have to agonize over this. So this is usually filled in. Okay? If there is information required on the screen and we click next to go to the next screen and it does not advance, we just look towards the top of the screen. There may be a red error message there, but normally this information is auto-populated, so we don't have to worry about it. Next slide.
A quick question.
Yes.
There's somebody who has a contract with an acceptor DODAC. However, the DODAC is not working for that particular person. How can that get fixed?
Okay, normally I like to talk about wide area workflow as a role-playing game. So normally for vendors, the most common role we choose when we are creating an account in wide area workflow is vendor. Okay, there is and you have your cage code. On the government side, okay, there are ship to points that have what we call a DODAC, Department of Defense Activity Address Code. Acceptors have to be registered under that DODAC. So sometimes the contract office may put an invalid DODAC. So when you say, if we can we go to the previous screen, Caitlin? Thank you. That code, if you look on the left side of the screen under the effective date, there's a service acceptor code there, okay? If there are CORs or acceptors registered for my code here, in my example, it's W25G1V, okay? You will not get an error message. You will allow, the system will allow you to advance. But sometimes if it's an invalid code, it might say there are no acceptors registered for this code, in which case you need to contract or call the contract office and have them give you the proper code. That information is coming from the government, so there would be no way for you to know the correct answer without calling the contract office. Okay. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Next slide, Caitlin. Thank you. So on this screen, I've highlighted the mandatory fields. I want to take a bit of time here to talk about that. Greatest chances for success of submitting a payment request in wide area workflow is to only provide the mandatory information. Those are the fields marked with a star. Okay, I know for completeness sake, I've had contractors try to fill in everything on the screen. And even though that's a valiant effort, what you might be doing is setting a condition later on in your invoice where you have to provide more information, or have to search in your contract for information that doesn't exist because it doesn't apply. So what happens is you start adding layers and you get yourself into a loop, and that's where the frustration sets in. So we want to keep it as simple as possible and only provide the mandatory information. On our screen here, I've highlighted that. Okay, an invoice number is mandatory. That is your invoice number. Wide area workflow does not generate an invoice number. If you don't have one, you can make one up. There's no right or wrong answer. You might have heard Caitlin in her presentation talk about final invoices. Okay, that is also a mandatory field. Okay, a word about the final invoice. That is the ultimate your ultimate completion date in your contract is basically when you're submitting your final invoice. So what I mean by that is at the end of the last period of performance or at the very end of your contract. Okay, the last invoice you'll be submitting, because sometimes you might be submitting an invoice against the period of performance, but it's the last one for that period of performance, but there is a new period of performance starting maybe tomorrow. Okay, you would still say final invoice. No, even though it's the last invoice for that period of performance, it's not the last invoice for your contract, if that makes sense. So you want to make sure that the final invoice is the ultimate or absolute final invoice on that contract. Final shipment should correspond. I have that down below. That should also correspond to the final invoice. Okay. If you mistakenly, and I've had this happen, if you mistakenly designated invoice as final, but there are more invoices to follow, the system wide area workflow will allow you to submit invoices after a final's been designated. You just have to provide a comment under the comments tab on the screen here, telling alerting the why this invoice is being submitted, and why the previous one's not the final. Okay. If you look towards the top, there's an error message in red. So again, if you mistype something or you forget to provide information, there will be an error code when you try to advance through the system. So if you see there's an error code there. This error message is standard for wide area workflow. It's just calling our attention to the line item tab, which I have the arrow here. We just need to provide a little bit more information. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
Are there any limitations to the type of bank account linked to WAF?
Well, it's not the bank account linked to WAF. It's the bank account linked to your company. Because again, when you register in SAM, you're providing financial information, your bank account, where you want these payments to be deposited. So when you submit an invoice in WAF and it's ready to be paid, DFAS, Defense Finance Accounting Service, has access to that information in SAM. So whatever account you have designated in SAM is where that payment is going to be wired. Okay, so it's not really your account really isn't linked in WAF at all. It's basically the account that you've designated in your SAM profile. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, Caitlin. So again, the line item, if we click on the line item tab, you'll see the line items that we've selected a few screens ago. They will appear here under line item details. They will appear in red. That is normal. If you look to the right under actions, we have 3 choices. Okay, the word invalid is there. That also is normal. Okay, that just means we have to provide some additional information within the line item itself. Sometimes there is no line item information that carries over into wide area workflow. Sometimes, when we award contracts, information will auto-populate. Sometimes the line items themselves do not auto-populate. So in the case like that, you may not have any line items here. And under actions, you may only have an option to add. My takeaway here is, as long as the line item is authorized in your contract or authorized in a modification when they're exercising an option, you can submit charges against it. Even though it doesn't appear in wide area workflow, if it exists and appears in your contract, you can bill against it. So let's dig into the line item. We're going to click on edit. We'll go to the next slide. And this is an example of the information when we're editing the line item details. Again, we only want to provide the mandatory information here. So in case no line item information is brought over to wide area workflow, we're going to have to manually fill it in. So we are going to have to go to the schedule in our contract where you find the line item number, the quantities, the unit of measure, and other information there. We'll have to fill that in ourselves. So that information should appear in your contract. Okay. The unit price, again, is the amount that you're billing for. Please make sure that is correct. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here's an example of a properly created or properly filled in line item tab. Just the mandatory fields are filled in. Okay. We don't Things maybe Caitlin knows what AAI and SDN stands for, but again, they're not mandatory fields. Do not agonize over them. So again, my takeaway here is only focus on the information that is mandatory and necessary in order to submit your invoice. It keeps it as simple as possible. Okay. We want to make sure we save all this information. We do that by clicking the Save CLIN button at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. And voila, there's nothing else in red. There's no error messages at the top of the screen. So it allowed us to go to the next screen and all we've done it properly. Next slide. At the top of the screen here, I know it's small print, unfortunately, but again, that's an example of an error message in case we are attempting to submit a final invoice. If we previously designated a final invoice, again, the system will allow us to submit additional invoices, even though we mistakenly called one a final invoice, but we have to provide a comment. So as you see there, it says initiator comments are mandatory. So to the left of the line item tab is a comments tab. We'll click on that. It'll take you to a text box and we can type in our justification for submitting an additional invoice. Next slide. Okay. And this is a
question real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we get to the submit. Actually, two.
Go ahead.
If I have a contract written in with a quantity of 1,000 and a unit price of $1, WAF does not allow me to change the quantity, only the unit price, but will it get rejected?
You should be able to change the quantity. I know on our contracts, partial shipments are acceptable. So if you have you can definitely change the quantities. At least that's been my experience. And you can also change the unit price. Those fields are not frozen. Caitlin, if we go back a couple of screens to that blank line item tab. Two more. One more. There you go. So if you look here, it's mandatory information, but they are blank. Okay. Even if we advance one more, let's go forward one screen, Caitlin. The unit price can be edited, and so can the quantity shipped. So as you see, those fields are blank, but even if they're populated, they are editable fields. So you can change the unit price and you can change the quantities. I've never had an experience where either of those were uneditable.
Okay, and as a follow-up, I think is as a cost voucher, only it does not allow me to change the quantity. It is grayed out with a number 1 in the quantity.
Well, I'm going to defer to Caitlin on that one because I've never done cost vouchers, but maybe that is an uneditable field because a voucher is just a single document. But I'm gonna defer to the expert on that one.
That is a strong word, expert. Can you repeat the question so I could kind of absorb?
Absolutely. As a cost voucher, it does not allow me to change the quantity. It is grayed out with a number 1 in quantity.
As far as invoices go?
Yes, the way I understand it for
Quantity.
invoicing, right, Tara? If you can share some more info about that, just put in the Q&A.
You can only invoice like one invoice at a time.
Yeah, and while we wait for that, I have another one that I think pertains to this slide.
Okay.
I have a constant issue with the unit of measure. It seems that it's very arbitrary. I have had times where the contract states the unit of measure is LO, lot.
Right.
But it will then get rejected for not being EA, each. When I asked the POC, I was told it is what it is. And they could not answer where this unit of measure came from. Can you clarify?
Well, normally the unit of measure will be spelled out in your contract in the schedule. So you'll see the quantity, you'll see the unit of measure, and you'll see the unit price. That unit of measure that is in your contract should carry over. And so maybe it's being rejected because the person reviewing the information at DFAS sees the contract, sees the unit of measure in the contract. And I'm not sure if it's I don't know if it's being changed. or what. I have seen different line items may have different units of measure, but it's not arbitrary. It should appear in your contract. I'm not sure why it would change. It should pull over from your contract as into WAF without being changed in any way. Usually
Perfect.
when it comes over and it pulls over from your contract, the unit of measure you can't really edit.
Right. And we have a follow-up on the cost voucher question. The contract is written with a quantity of 1,000, but unit price 1, it must be invoiced as a cost voucher. And when I go to create my line, it only allows me to edit the quantity.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
familiar
I'm
with
not
the cost
sure.
part on that one. So
I would probably defer back to the contracting officer
For sure.
to share that you have problems and to maybe get clarification. That's what I would recommend.
and then the other thing I could offer is I have met on Teams with contractors and they can share their screens with me, and maybe we can figure that out in real time together. So I made the cardinal sin of not adding my contact information to the last slide. I apologize, but during the break I emailed that slide to Chuck, so hopefully he can kind of append that to the end of this presentation, and then you can reach out to me, and like I said, we can get together on Teams and take a look at that. Maybe we can come up with a solution.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Caitlin, let's advance a couple of slides. I know I apologize. Okay. And so we were adding a comment. So when we click on the comments tab, this is where we we give our justification why we're to the payment office, why we're submitting additional invoices if we've already marked the previous one as final. When we have all the information in, we click submit. Okay, that's going to submit our payment request. Next slide. Okay. There's a word about comments here. Comments are required when payment requests are rejected as well. So in other words, when we return a request, if it's not a properly created invoice, we want to tell you what to fix, obviously. So you need to know what to fix. We want to tell you the mistake that was made. Sometimes comments are also required in certain cases, like the final versus final. If there's barcode information, sometimes our contract office exempts that. But for contracts with a unit price and supply contracts with a unit price over $5,000 in value, there is some UID information. And sometimes we exempt that. So you would have to tell wide area workflow why you're not already adding RFID information or any of the barcode information. So those may be situations where you need to add a comment, but also comments are required on the government side when we're returning an invoice to you, when we're rejecting it, if there is a mistake made. Okay, next slide. Okay, I should have probably flipped these slides, but after you click submit, okay, if we've changed any values in our invoice that may differ from the contract value. In my example here, I changed the unit price for a line that is a little bit different than it appears in the contract. Wide area workflow is going to flag that, and you're going to get what's called a wide area workflow validation warning message. This is not an error. I get a lot of calls from frantic contractors saying, I can't submit my invoice. I keep getting this error message. And it turns out to be a validation warning message. That is all it is. It is a warning. It is not an error. It's just calling your attention to the fact that you change the value. And it's almost like a double check. If you look here, there's our unit price that we changed. So if that's correct, all we have to do is just click OK there in the box, and it will submit it. Next slide. And when we reach this screen, we've hit success. But I do want to call about a takeaway here, because we have talked about acceptors and people that are responsible at the government for processing your payment requests. On this screen, by default, after you submit an invoice, the contractor and the group administrator at the federal agency gets a notice. I'm a group administrator, so I get hundreds of emails every time an invoice is submitted in wide area workflow, I get a system generated message from wide area workflow, but I am not the acceptor. I am not the COR. So you want to make sure this does not happen automatically. So you want to make sure that your COR or your acceptor, the person responsible for processing your invoice, knows that it's in wide area workflow. Otherwise, it will languish there, and that will cause a payment delay because we don't know it's there. So you want to make sure you let the contract office know, or the person, your COR, know that the invoice has been submitted so they can get to it in a timely manner and expedite it for payment. Next slide. This kind of harkens back to what Caitlin talked about in her presentation about some obvious mistakes that are made in invoices that may cause them to reject. These are some of my experiences. They are a little similar to what she did. For instance, if we mistype the CLIN, the contract line item, it could be 0001 in your contract. If you misspell it or make up your own contract line item, it may reject. So it's an obvious mistake. Or if the funds don't exist on your contract, if you're requesting more that's available, that will cause it to suspend. I talked about being expired in SAM. I have had situations where a company submitted an invoice. They were active in SAM at the time they submitted it, but they expired before they could get paid. So you want to make sure you stay current in SAM. That will cause an invoice to reject. And then there are some cases where an invoice will suspend if you add a shipping charge, or if you change the quantity above the quantity that is spelled out in your contract. There are some exceptions, or to the rule, if you will, for shipping charges. I've added the clauses there. So what will happen in those cases is, even though the charge that you're requesting exceeds what's available in your contract, if it's authorized by those clauses, when it is reviewed by DFAS, it'll be reversed and it'll be processed for payment. Okay, next slide. Okay. So those are basically, as we're generating our document and submitting it through the wide area workflow, those are some of the things that can happen that may create a barrier or a payment delay. I encourage companies to use My Invoice, that once you've submitted in wide area workflow, you want to track the status of it. So when you register in wide area workflow as a vendor, you will get access to both wide area workflow and My Invoice. Okay, so post invoice submission, you'll want to click on My Invoice. Next slide. It'll take you to a screen where we can go under reports in the top left corner. Next slide. And then we can click on the contract number. If we want to search by contracts, we click on that. Next slide. And then we can type in our contract number in the search screen and then hit search, or hit the search button. Next slide. And these are the results that we will see. So, but for the contract number, we'll see some invoices, some payment requests that we've been submitted. If you look on the right-hand side under actions, there is a details link. So if we click on that and go to the next slide, it'll open up the record and it'll tell us what the status of our payment request is. Okay. In this particular case, the status is in the upper right-hand corner. This invoice is paid, which means you should have received payment. So going back to the question about the bank account, you want to check the financial or the bank account, the banking information that you have in your SAM profile to see if a deposit has been made. Some other status messages may be scheduled for payment. That's a status message. That means it's about to be paid. That's good. Sometimes it may say receiving report required. That means that the government agency has not reviewed your payment request yet. So it's sitting in what we call a submitted status, but it hasn't been processed yet. So you might want to get in touch with the contract office to get them to move along and expedite that, so there's no payment delays. Okay. Next slide, please.
I have a question that
Yes.
came in.
Yes.
Is WAF only used for federal contracts?
Yes. For Department of Defense, it is. On the federal side, the non-DoD agencies, they are getting migrated into wide area workflow, but it's not used for state contracts or local. They usually have their own portals to submit payment requests.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, this harkens back to information that Caitlin presented. This is about those payment terms. Okay, so in the fixed price world, we have fixed price supply and service contracts. those payment terms are usually net 30 days after the submission of a proper invoice. You notice she had the word proper in red letters, so we know that's important. A proper invoice means it's correct. And so we have 30 days to process it, otherwise it will accrue interest. On construction contracts, it's a little bit different. The payment terms are a little narrower because we know there are subcontractors that need to be paid. So we don't want any subcontractors walking off the job because they didn't get their money. So on interim progress payments, the payment terms are 14 days. And on the final invoice, it is 30 days. And you heard Caitlin touch on this a little bit about physical completion. So we won't make the final payment in wide area workflow until we consider the contract to be physically complete, meaning all the services or constructions have been completed, the supplies have been delivered, and it meets the contractual obligations and satisfactory to the government. Okay, next slide. Okay, if we have run into a payment issue, okay, the best way to do that is to submit a help ticket to the DFAS, Defense Finance Accounting Service office that has payment responsibility on your contract. You can find that out in the payment will be made by block on the first page of your contract. So what we can do is submit a help ticket to have them look at the issue and resolve it for us or help us to get it resolved. So when we go to the DFAS website, which is dfas.mil, you'll see in the right-hand corner, there's the Ask DFAS link. So we'll click on that. Next slide. And we're going to start going through the process of submitting a ticket. So we'll click on contractors and vendors. Next slide. Okay, here is the code that appears in the payment will be made by block. That is tied to a specific DFAS office somewhere in the country. We normally use DFAS Columbus, which is in Ohio. So the column headers there are links. You'll find, and when you find in the payment block, it will identify the DFAS office. So we'll click on that column header. In our example, is DFAS Columbus. Next slide. And we get ever so closer. We're going to click Submit a Ticket. Next slide. We're going to click Army because we're the Army, and we want to find out the payment status. So when we click on the category Army, the subcategories will open. So we want to know the payment status. We'll click on Payment Status. Next slide. And we'll actually get to the help ticket itself. Okay, all of the fields, again, marked with a star are mandatory. I highlighted them here. Any interested party can submit a help ticket. So it can be DCAA, it can be us on the contract side, it can be the vendor, it can be an Apex accelerator. Any interested party can submit an invoice. Additional emails are below the primary initiator. A passcode will need to be assigned to that. Because when we submit this ticket, you will get a confirmation email from DFAS customer care, and any status updates to your help ticket will have a link in it. In order to access the current status of your help ticket, you will need that passcode. And then towards the bottom of the screen, obviously you want to put in your contract number and the invoice number in question. And then under question, the nature of your inquiry. Once you have all that in, you click Submit. Next slide. Getting to the end, I promise. And this is a recap of what we did, so we can make changes if we have to. But if we're good, we click Submit. Next slide. And we're done. And I'm done. Are there any questions?
I don't see any right now, but we'll give people a moment to see what questions they have. And if you have any questions related to WAF or Pi in general, you're obviously more than welcome to contact your local Apex accelerator. There are some things that the help desk needs to handle. And I just want to make a plug. A Pi has a very excellent and very helpful help desk. So
they are crucial to getting your profiles.
Yes,
activated, but they will not provide assistance submitting payment requests. So that is one thing they will not do. So folks like me are available. Thank you, Chuck. There is my contact information. Like I said, I made the cardinal sin of omitting it. It was unintentional, I promise. But if you have any questions after, reach out to either Caitlin or myself. There is our contact information.
Perfect. Question came in. Who gives the passcode?
The passcode is generated by the person initiating the help ticket. And so if it's an Apex accelerator, for example, that's generating the ticket on behalf of one of your clients, you want to make sure that you share the passcode with those interested parties like the vendor or the contract office, so that we can all have access to the status of that help ticket.
Thank you. We'll wait another moment to see if there are any other questions come in.
I realize it's intense. There's a lot of information to digest, so I apologize. But again, this is our first tag team of, if you will. So the feedback that we receive will be very, very helpful. So if you find it to be too much information, let us know, and I'll be happy to trim it down.
I think it flowed really well between the DCAA side and the WAF side. I thought it worked together really, really well. And what I find too, the more you attend these types of trainings, the more things will make sense, especially if you're new to this. It will all come together. PI has excellent training aids, PDFs, they have videos. And of course, you have your Apex accelerator. And it is crucial, something that you were saying earlier, Dave, is look at your contract. What type of invoice type are you supposed to use? What is your DODAC? So before you sit down and start your invoicing, make sure you have all that information gathered, that you don't have to stop and go back and then find the information. Just preparation is key. And if there's anything missing, go contact your contracting officer or your Apex saying, hey, can you help me find, like, where is my DODAC? Sometimes it's quite buried in the contract document.
Correct.
So you can search or do Control F for DODAC. That is a quick way to find it. But I find preparation is key.
Well, it's also incumbent on the government to provide clear instructions to the to our contractors, and sometimes we fail to do that. And when we do, the contractor might have no choice but to wing it. And when they wing it, sometimes mistakes are made. So you know,
Yes.
we do bear some responsibility in that as well.
Yes, absolutely. I don't see any other questions. Several people saying thank you for providing this. It was very, very helpful. And we sure appreciate you both taking the time to talk to us today. I'll turn it back over to Beth.
Great. Thanks, Shuda. Well, on behalf of DCAA, ACC, let's see how many acronyms we can throw in that you'll know. NAPEX and your local Apex Accelerator, we want to thank you for attending. So many thanks to you, David Kern with ACC, and Caitlin Regal with the Defense Contracting Audit Agency for bringing us this webinar today. You are always a wealth of information. Please join us next month for the DCAA Introductory Series, which provides information on an intro to DCAA and audit processes overview and breaking into government contracting from a DCAA perspective. We've dropped the link to register for next month's series in the chat box, and don't forget to go there and pick up those helpful links that Chuck has also offered. We hope to see you next month. We're glad that you joined us today, and we invite you to go on with the rest of your day. Reach out to your Apex Accelerator. We are here to help. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Take care.